The boy ran to save the elderly man who had fallen in the middle of the busy avenue, ignoring the danger the next day. He could hardly believe it when the same man knocked on his door with a gift that would change his life forever. William walked down the street, his bare feet making soft, quick steps on the dusty road. The sun was high and the cracked pavement seemed to reflect every ray, making everything hotter. His t-shirt was old, a bit faded, and his shorts hung loose around his skinny legs. The houses he passed were all the same, small, tired-looking, fenced by crumbling walls that offered little privacy. He moved through it all like he belonged because he did this. Neighborhood was all he knew as he approached the soccer field, a stretch of dried-up ground with rocks scattered everywhere. He saw the boys gathered there waiting for him. He felt a smile spread across his face. They didn't have uniforms or cleats, but didn't matter. The goalposts were made of 2 sticks dug into the earth, and the lines were imaginary. The game was still soccer, and soccer meant everything to William. "Hey William, you coming or what?" yelled Carl, his best friend, standing in the makeshift goal. His voice echoed in the hot air, filled with impatience. William jogged closer, dropping a makeshift ball on the ground. As he reached them, it was old, patched together from bits of rubber, but William held it like a prized possession. He kicked it to Carl. "Let's do it," William said. He didn't need to say more. The others cheered, and they split into teams. Right there, without any arguments. It was simple. It always was. The game began, and William ran across the dry ground, feeling the rush. He loved so much. Dirt clung to his bare feet, and he ignored the sharp pain when he stepped on a rock. He dribbled past one of the boys, then another, and then launched the ball towards Carl, who caught it easily. The field, the laughter, the quick breathing. This was the best part of William's day. When the game ended, everyone sprawled out on the ground to catch their breath. William sat back, resting his head against his knees. The boys were talking, their voices filled with a mix of excitement and hopelessness. "You think we could play in a real field one day?" one of the boys, Marcos, asked, almost as if he was talking to himself. "Maybe," Carl said, shrugging. He wiped sweat from his forehead, then looked at William. "What do you think? We'll think we could make it." William wanted to answer with a confident yes, but all he could do was nod, not trusting his voice to hide his doubts. He didn't know how it could happen, not with everything that stood in their way, but it was better to nod and hope just a little than to say nothing at all. As the sun started to set, William left the field, walking back toward home. The dust clung to his legs, and the sweat made his shirt stick to his back. His neighborhood came back into view, a clutter of homes, small windows, and tired people who walked slowly, like the weight of life was heavier here. He watched it all as he walked, seeing his own little house at the end of the street. He knew his mom was still at work. She worked long hours as a maid, and sometimes she'd come home so tired she'd barely say a word. He walked inside, setting his things down quietly. There wasn't much to do here, but he cleaned up a bit. It was something he had taken on, with no one telling him to. With his mom working so much and his dad gone, it just made sense. The only noise in the small house was the sound of the old ceiling fan creaking above. A little while later, the door opened, and his mother stepped inside. She looked worn out, the lines under her eyes deep from exhaustion. Her smile, though, when she saw William, was as warm as she could manage. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft. She placed her purse down, and William could hear her tired sigh. "Hey, Mom," William replied. He went to help her, but she waved him off. Already settling down on the small sofa, she glanced at him, her eyes moving from his dusty feet to his face. "Soccer again?" she asked, a smile tugging at her lips. "Yeah," he said. She nodded, her eyes growing distant for a moment. "You know your dad, he used to play too. You remind me of him sometimes," she said almost to herself. William stayed silent. He didn't like talking about his dad. His dad had left without any proper explanation, and it left a gap that William couldn't fill, no matter how much he played or helped out around the house. "I'm going to make something to eat," he said, changing the subject quickly. His mother nodded, and he went to the small kitchen. As he boiled water for some pasta, he looked down at his feet, dirty, sore, bare. He thought about his friends, their dreams of becoming soccer players, and for a moment the thought seemed ridiculous. His dad had tried and failed. Who was he to think he could be different that night after dinner? He went to bed with those thoughts in his head. The darkness of his small room seemed to press in on him, and he wished he could just sleep and not think about it at all. But even with his eyes closed, he could see the field, the boys running, and the ball at his feet. He sighed, unsure if what he felt was hope or just foolishness. All he knew was that he couldn't shake the feeling that somehow he had to keep trying. William woke up to the sound of the neighbor's dog barking. The sun had barely risen, but he was already used to early mornings. He got dressed quickly, put on his worn-out t-shirt, and stepped outside. The air was cool, a break from the usual heat that blanketed the neighborhood later in the day. Today, he was planning on meeting Carl again at the field. They said they'd have a rematch since the teams were uneven the day before. He walked down the street, kicking the small stone ahead of him, watching it bounce over the pavement. The neighborhood was starting to wake up, people heading to work, doors opening, old cars starting up. William liked these moments. There was a quietness to them that made everything seem simpler. No expectations, no big dreams that felt impossible. Just now, as he got closer to the avenue, the noise changed. The avenue was always busy, cars zooming by, honking horns, people yelling as they crossed. He stopped at the edge, waiting for a break in the traffic, his eyes on the far side of the road, where he could already see the path leading to the field. He was about to step forward when something caught his attention. A figure in a wheelchair struggling near the middle of the avenue. William squinted, his eyes locking onto the old man in the wheelchair. The man looked panicked, his wheels stuck in a small gap in the road. Cars zoomed by, horns blaring, and no one seemed to be paying attention. William's heart pounded. He couldn't just stand there. Before he knew it, his feet moved. He sprinted across the avenue, his bare feet slapping against the asphalt. He heard more honks, angry yells, but none of that mattered. All he could see was the old man struggling, scared. As the cars got closer, William ran faster, weaving between the traffic. His lungs burned, but he kept going, the urgency pushing him. When he reached the old man, he grabbed the handles of the wheelchair and pulled with all his strength. It wouldn't budge at first, and William's panic rose. A car sped by too close, making his hair stand on end. He tried again, harder this time, finally managing to lift the wheels out of the gap. "Hold on, William," shouted, his voice barely audible over the noise of traffic. He pushed the wheelchair forward, moving as fast as he could, his heart racing. He kept his eyes forward, not daring to look at the cars behind him. They reached the other side, and William let out a breath. He hadn't realized he was holding the old man was safe, and so was he. William looked down at the man whose face was pale, his hands shaking on the armrests. "Thank you, son," the old man said, his voice weak but filled with emotion. I thought I was done for." William nodded, breathing heavily. "No problem, sir, you're safe now." He looked around, expecting to see others rushing over, maybe someone saying something, anything, but no one came. The cars kept moving, people kept walking as if nothing had happened. "Let's get you out of here," William said, pushing the old man further away from the avenue. He found a spot on the sidewalk, a quieter place where they could stop. "What's your name, boy?" the old man asked, his eyes finally meeting William's. He was still catching his breath, but his eyes were kind. "William," he answered. "And you?" "Raymond." "Raymond, just Raymond." He gave a weak smile, his eyes closing for a second. William wondered if he was hurt. "Are you okay? Should I call someone?" William asked, glancing around, but there weren't many people paying attention. Raymond shook his head. "I'll be all right. Just needed help getting out of that mess." "You've got guts, kid, more than most people." William didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. He heard a siren in the distance, and soon an ambulance pulled up, stopping near them. A paramedic got out, rushing over. "Is he all right?" the paramedic asked, looking from Raymond to William. "He's shaken up," William said. "He was stuck in the street, but I got him out." The paramedic nodded, moving closer to Raymond. "We'll take it from here, son. Thank you for helping." William stepped back, watching as they helped Raymond into the ambulance. Raymond looked back at William and nodded a silent thank you before the doors closed and the ambulance pulled away. William stood there, his heart still pounding from the adrenaline. He expected to feel good, proud maybe for helping, but instead there was just this empty feeling, like what he did didn't matter to anyone else. The cars kept moving, the People walking by barely gave him a glance. He was just another face they ignored. He turned and started walking back towards the field, his feet feeling heavier with each step. He tried to shake off the feeling it didn't matter what anyone else thought he'd done the right thing, but it was hard not to feel like he was invisible. When he reached the field, Carl was there bouncing the ball. Between his feet, "Where you been, man?" Carl called out, his voice full of impatience. "We thought you weren't coming." William tried to force a smile, but it felt wrong on his face. "Had to help someone," he said, simply not wanting to explain. Carl raised an eyebrow. "You always get yourself into stuff, you know that." He laughed, shaking his head. "Come on, we're playing." William nodded, dropping his bag on the side and joining in. But today, even as he ran across the field, his mind kept wandering back to that moment in the street, to Raymond's face, to the way no one else even looked. It left a bitter taste, one that didn't go away even when he scored a goal. As the sun began to set, William said goodbye to the boys and headed home. His thoughts were heavy, the sense of loneliness gnawing at him. When he got home, his mother was already there, her face tired from a long day. She looked up as he came in. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, concern in her voice. "What happened today?" William hesitated, then told her about Raymond, about the street, about the cars. He tried to make it sound casual, like it wasn't a big deal, but he could see the fear flash across her eyes, and it made his stomach twist. "William, you can't just do things like that," she said, her voice stern. "It's dangerous. You could have been hurt, or worse, I know." "But no buts," she interrupted, shaking her head. "I can't lose you too, William. You have to be careful. You have to think before you act." William swallowed the weight of her words pressing down on him. He nodded, but inside he felt like she didn't understand. He couldn't have just stood there. He had to help, but he didn't say that. He just kept his mouth shut and went to his room. That night he lay in bed staring at the ceiling. He couldn't shake the feeling of being alone, of no one really seeing him or what he did. He thought of Raymond, of the way his hands had trembled, and he wondered if Raymond would even remember him tomorrow, or if, like everyone else, he'd just fade away. The next day, William woke up feeling a sense of emptiness he couldn't shake. The morning was a blur. He did what he always did, brushed his teeth, grabbed a piece of bread for breakfast, but everything felt muted, like the colors had drained out of his life. Overnight, the memory of saving Miss Raymond played in his head on repeat, and he kept feeling that strange mix of pride and disappointment. Pride because he knew he did the right thing, but disappointment because it felt like no one else cared. He was just another kid trying to matter. He left home deciding he'd still go to the soccer field, but his steps were slower today. The usual excitement wasn't there, and he couldn't quite find it, no matter how hard he tried. As he passed by the local market, the shop owner, a stocky man named Paulo, spotted him. "Hey kid," Paulo yelled, pointing at William. His face was twisted into an angry frown, and William stopped. Surprised. "Come here." William approached cautiously, his heart sinking. He hadn't done anything, but the way Paulo was looking at him made him feel like he was already guilty. "Were you messing around here earlier?" Paulo asked, his eyes narrow. "I found something missing, and I know you kids sometimes think it's funny to play around." William blinked, stunned. I wasn't here, sir. I was just walking by." Paulo folded his arms, still looking suspicious. "Sure you were. I've heard that one before. I swear I didn't take anything," William said, his voice cracking slightly. He could feel the heat on his cheeks, the familiar sting of humiliation. Paulo just shook his head, waving him away. "Just stay out of trouble, all right? I don't need any more of your type hanging around here." William clenched his teeth, his fists balling at his sides. His type, he knew what Paulo meant. Kids like him from his neighborhood, with no shoes, walking the streets. To people like Paulo, that was all they were. Trouble. He turned quickly and walked away, his face burning with frustration. His chest felt tight, and he tried to take a deep breath, but it didn't help. He felt the shame crawl up his skin, making him want to disappear. He wanted to tell Paulo that he'd saved a man's life yesterday, that he wasn't just some kid stealing from markets, but he knew it wouldn't make a difference. Paulo wouldn't care. When he reached the soccer field, he didn't feel like playing. The boys were already there, laughing and kicking the ball around, but William stood by the side watching. "Hey, will come on," Carl called, waving him over. William shook his head. "Not today. I Just I don't feel like it, Carl frowned, walking over to him. What's up with you? You're acting weird. William hesitated, then sighed. It's nothing, just stuff. People thinking they know who I am when they don't. He looked away, staring at the dry dirt of the field. Carl shrugged. People are dumb, man. Who cares what they think? William wanted to agree. He wanted to shrug it off and join the game, but it wasn't that easy. He could still hear Paulo's voice in his head, accusing him. He felt the sting of his mother's words the night before, too, telling him to be careful, telling him not to act at all. Felt like it was piling up, too heavy to carry. Maybe I'll go home, William said quietly. Carl looked at him, confused. You sure it's just yeah, I'm sure. William gave a small forced smile. I'll catch you guys later. Carl watched him for a second, then nodded. All right, but don't stay down. Okay, we got another game tomorrow. We need you, man. William just nodded and turned away. As he walked home, he felt each step grow heavier. He didn't know how to shake this feeling, the constant sense that he was trying and trying, but nothing changed. No one saw him. When he got home, his mother was there, standing by the sink, her hands in a bowl of soapy water. She looked up when he came in, her eyes searching his face. You're back early, she said. Her voice was soft, but there was a question in it. Yeah, it didn't feel like playing. William mumbled. He sat down at the small table, resting his head in his hands. His mother dried her hands, coming over to sit across from him. She looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. What's bothering you, William? He hesitated, then looked up at her, his eyes tired. It's just everything, Mom. Yesterday I saved this guy. He was in the middle of the road, and no one else even looked. I helped him, but it was like no one even saw me. And then today, Paulo at the market accused me of stealing just because I walked by. It's like no one cares, no matter what I do. His mother's face softened, and she reached out, resting her hand on his. William, the world isn't always fair. People will look at you and make assumptions. It's not right, but it's the way things are. That's why you have to be careful. You have to think before you act. William looked away, pulling his hand back. But if I always just think before I act, then I won't do anything. What about the man yesterday? I couldn't just leave him there. His mother sighed, her shoulders slumping. I know, baby, I know you did the right thing, but I'm scared. You're all I have, William. I can't lose you. William looked at her, seeing the fear in her eyes. It made his chest tighten even more, but he didn't know how to fix it. He didn't know how to make her see that he had to act, that he couldn't just stay quiet and careful. Yeah, he said finally, his voice low. I get it. The rest of the day passed slowly. William stayed in his room, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts heavy. He thought about Paulo, about the cars speeding by on the avenue, about Raymond's face as he was taken away by the ambulance. He thought about the empty look in his mother's eyes when she talked about his father that night at dinner. His mother spoke up again. Her voice was hesitant, like she was trying to find the right words. William, I think there's something you should know, she said. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. About your father. William stiffened. They didn't talk about his dad much. He'd left years ago, and whenever William asked, his mom always gave vague answers. He didn't just leave because he couldn't find work, she said. Her voice was quiet, almost like she didn't want to say it out loud. He left because he couldn't handle it, the pressure, the expectations. He wanted to be more, but he felt like he was drowning, and he couldn't stay. William stared at her, his heart pounding. He didn't know what to say. Part of him felt angry, like he had always been, but part of him also felt sad, understanding in a way he hadn't before. The weight of wanting to be more, of feeling like it was impossible. It was something he knew. Well, Mom, he started, but she shook her head, giving him a small, sad smile. I just don't want you to feel like you have to carry everything, William. I want you to be a kid. I want you to have dreams, but I also want you to be okay. William nodded, but inside he felt torn. He didn't know how to let go of the pressure. He didn't know how to just be okay when everything around him felt like it was pushing him down. He went to bed that night feeling more confused than ever. The thoughts of giving up on soccer, of just staying home and helping his mom, started to feel more real. Maybe it was easier to stop trying. Maybe it was better to just be careful, like his mom said. But as he lay there staring at his bare feet, he felt a flicker of some Something else, something that refused to let go. He didn't know if it was hope or foolishness, but it was there, small but alive, the morning after his conversation with his mother. William woke up with a strange mix of emotions. He felt heavy, like the weight of his father's story was pressing on him, but there was also a part of him that wanted to fight against it. The day was just beginning, the sunlight peeking through the small cracks in the window. He stayed in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, trying to sort out the mess in his head. Eventually, he got up, getting dressed. Slowly, he glanced at the door, considering whether or not he should go out to the field. He wasn't sure if he wanted to face his friends today. Part of him wanted to pretend like nothing was wrong, but another part of him didn't want to have to keep smiling when he didn't feel it. When he stepped into the kitchen, his mother was already up, sipping her coffee. At the table, she looked up as he walked in, her eyes soft. "You're up late today," she said, trying to sound casual, but William could hear the worry underneath. "Yeah," he said, shrugging. He grabbed a piece of bread and sat across from her. He didn't really feel like eating, but he took a bite anyway. The silence stretched between them, the words from last night still hanging in the air. His mother cleared her throat, putting her mug down. "William, about what I said last night, I didn't mean to put all that on you. I don't want you to think that you have to prove something to anyone." William looked at her, his brow furrowed. "But I do, don't I? I mean, Dad left because he couldn't handle it, and you're here working all the time trying to take care of everything. I feel like I need to do something, be something." She reached across the table, placing her hand over his baby. "You don't have to be anything for anyone but yourself. I want you to be happy. I want you to follow your dreams. But I also want you to be safe. That's what matters to me." William looked down at his plate, not sure how to respond. He knew she meant well. He knew she loved him, but the idea of just being safe felt like a cage. He nodded, though, because he didn't want to argue. "Yeah, I get it," she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She knew he was just saying it for her. She squeezed his hand once more before standing up to get ready for work. As she left, William sat there for a while, staring at the bread on his plate. He felt torn. His mom wanted him to be okay, to stay safe, but he wanted more than that. He didn't want to just exist. He wanted to be out there on the field, doing something that mattered, even if it was just kicking a ball around. But the thought of his dad, of the pressure he couldn't handle, kept nagging at him. What if he was just setting himself up for failure? He left the house a little later, deciding to walk around instead of heading straight to the field. He wandered the streets, watching the other kids playing, running past him, their laughter filling the air. He watched as people hurried by, too focused on their own lives to notice anything else. His feet carried him without thinking, and soon he found himself at the field anyway. It was empty, the ground cracked and dry, and William stood at the edge staring at it. Usually he'd be excited to see it, but today it just felt empty. He took a step forward, walking onto the field, his bare feet kicking up dust. He remembered the conversation he had with Carl the day before about how people were dumb and who cared what they thought. William wanted to believe that he wanted to just push everything away and play, but it wasn't that simple. He heard footsteps approaching and turned to see Carl walking up, a smile spreading across his face as he saw William. "Hey, I thought you weren't coming," Carl called out, jogging over to him. William shrugged, managing a small smile. "Yeah, I wasn't sure, just a lot on my mind." Carl looked at him, nodding. "I get it, man, but you know what always helps with that." He grinned, picking up the ball from the side of the field and bouncing it on his knee. "A good game." William watched him for a moment, then sighed, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Maybe Carl was right. Maybe what he needed was just to play, to forget everything else for a while. He took a step forward, and Carl passed the ball to him. "All right, let's see if you can keep up today." Carl teased a challenge in his eyes. William gave him a small smirk. "You wish they started kicking the ball around, just the two of them." It wasn't like the usual games with everyone there, but it felt good to move, to focus on the ball and nothing else for a few minutes. It was just the two of them, the sun above and the dusty field beneath their feet. As they played, more boys began to show up one by one. They joined in the field, filling with laughter and shouts, the game growing bigger. William felt himself relax a little more, the tension in his chest easing with each kick, each pass. But then, as he was running for the ball, something in the back of his mind stopped him. He hesitated, his eyes on the other boys, on their shoes, their clean clothes. He looked down at himself, barefoot, his shirt old and worn. The doubts came rushing back, and suddenly he felt out of place again. "We'll pass it," Carl yelled, but William didn't move. He stood there, the ball rolling past him, his heart pounding. The others ran past him, not noticing his hesitation, but William felt it like a weight pressing down on him. "Hey, you okay?" Carl asked, running up to him, his brow furrowed. William forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, I just lost focus for a second." Carl looked at him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, just don't zone out on me again, man. We need you." William nodded, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. They kept playing, but the doubts wouldn't leave him alone. The more he looked around, the more he felt like he didn't belong. The others were laughing carefree, while William felt the weight of everything pressing down on him, his mom's worry, his dad's failure, Paulo's accusations. When the game ended, the other boys scattered, some heading home, others sticking around to talk. Carl stayed by William's side, his eyes on him. "You want to talk about it?" Carl asked, his voice quieter now that it was just the two of them. William sighed, shaking his head. "I don't know, man. It's just everything, you know. Sometimes it feels like no matter what it's not enough." Carl nodded, his expression serious. "Yeah, I get that, but Will, you're here, you're playing. That's something. You can't let all that other stuff get to you." William looked at him, wanting to believe that he wanted to just let go, to be like Carl, carefree, not thinking too much. But it wasn't that easy. "Maybe," William said, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked down at his bare feet again, feeling the doubts tighten around him. Carl clapped him on the shoulder, giving him a reassuring smile. "You'll get there, man. I know you will." William tried to smile back, but it felt forced. He nodded, though, because he didn't know what else to say. As he walked home that evening, the sun setting behind a rows of small houses, William felt the weight of the day pressing down on him. He knew his mom wanted him to stay safe. He knew Carl believed in him, but inside, he felt like he was fighting a battle he couldn't win. Like the doubts were always there, ready to pull him back. He reached his house, the door creaking as he stepped inside. His mother was there, already home from work, her tired smile greeting him. "Hey, baby, how was your day?" she asked, her voice warm. William gave her a small smile, shrugging. "It was all right, Mom," she nodded, her eyes searching his face. She knew there was more he wasn't saying, but she didn't push. She just smiled, and that was enough for now. As William lay in bed that night, staring at the dark ceiling, he thought about the field, about Carl, about his father. He didn't know what he was supposed to do. He didn't know if he should keep trying, or if it was better to just let go, to stop fighting and just be safe like his mom wanted. But deep down there was still that small spark, that little part of him that didn't want to give up, even if it was just a tiny flicker. It was there, and maybe for now, that was enough. The morning was different from the start. William had barely gotten out of bed when he heard a knock at the door. It wasn't common to have visitors, especially not this early. His mother called to him from the other room, her voice confused. "William, can you see who's at the door?" William quickly pulled on his shirt, his curiosity piqued. He walked through the small hallway, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. When he opened the door, he was not prepared for what he saw. Standing there, dressed in clean but simple clothes, was Mr. Raymond, the same man he had pulled out of the middle of the avenue just a couple of days ago. William blinked, his mouth slightly open in surprise. "Mr. Raymond?" he asked, not quite sure if he was seeing things. Mr. Raymond gave him a warm smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Good morning, William. I hope I didn't come too early." Before William could answer, his mother appeared behind him, wiping her hands on a towel. She looked at Mr. Raymond with confusion, then at her son. "Who is this, William?" she asked, her voice polite but cautious. William cleared his throat, stepping aside so Mr. Raymond could. His mother, "This is Mr. Raymond. I helped him the other day," William said, unsure how much detail to give. He didn't want to worry his mom again, not after everything they talked about. Mr. Raymond nodded, smiling at William's mother. "Yes, your boy here saved my life. I was stuck in the middle of a very busy street, and if it weren't for him, I don't know what might have happened." He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "I wanted to come by and thank him properly, and I brought a little Something. William's mother looked taken aback, her eyes moving from Mr. Raymond to William. For a moment she looked like she was about to scold her son, but then she seemed to change her mind. Instead, she smiled, though there was still a hint of concern in her eyes. "Well, that was very kind of him," she said, nodding. "Why don't you come inside, Mr. Raymond? We don't have much, but I can offer you some coffee." Mr. Raymond stepped inside, looking around the small home with interest. It was modest, with just a couple of chairs and a tiny table that had clearly seen better days, but he didn't seem to mind. He smiled as he took a seat in the living room, folding his hands on his lap. "Coffee would be wonderful, thank you," he said. William's mother disappeared into the kitchen, and William sat down across from Mr. Raymond, feeling awkward. He had not expected to see the old man again, let alone in his living room. Mr. Raymond looked at William, studying him for a moment before speaking. "You know, when I was in that situation, I was scared. I thought no one would help. People drove by, and they looked, but they didn't stop. And then you came." Without hesitation, he paused, his eyes softening. "You were brave, William. I don't think many would have done what you did." William shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with the praise. He didn't do it for recognition. He had just done what he thought was right. He looked down, nodding slightly. "I couldn't just leave you there." Mr. Raymond smiled, reaching into his bag and pulling out a small envelope. He held it out to William. "That's why I want to give you this. It's a thank you, but also it's an opportunity." William stared at the envelope, then looked up at Mr. Raymond, confused. "What is it?" he asked hesitantly. Taking it, Mr. Raymond smiled, his eyes twinkling. "Open it." William opened the envelope carefully, his fingers trembling a little. Inside there was a letter and a glossy piece of paper that took him a moment to understand. His eyes widened, his heart starting to pound. It was a voucher for a soccer training academy. Not just any academy, but one of the ones that he had always dreamed about, but never thought he could afford. Is this real?" William asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked at Mr. Raymond, his eyes wide with disbelief. Mr. Raymond nodded. "Yes, it's real. I know you love soccer, and I know how hard it can be to get opportunities like this when you come from places like this. I wanted to give you a chance, William. You've got something special in you, and I want you to have the chance to see where it can take you." William felt his throat tighten, his eyes stinging. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. This was more than just a thank you. This was a dream that he had never thought would be possible. He looked up at Mr. Raymond, not sure what to say. "Thank you," he finally managed, his voice cracking. I don't know how to thank you enough for this." Mr. Raymond waved his hand dismissively, smiling. "You don't have to thank me, William. Just promise me you'll go for it. Take this chance and make the most of it. That's all I want." At that moment, William's mother returned with a small cup of coffee, placing it in front of Mr. Raymond. She looked at William, then at the voucher in his hands, her eyes widening as she understood what it was. "Is that?" she started, her voice trailing off. William nodded, holding up the voucher. "Mr. Raymond gave me a spot in a soccer academy, Mom. He thinks I could really do it." His mother's eyes filled with tears, her hand coming up to her mouth. She looked at Mr. Raymond, her expression a mix of disbelief and gratitude. I don't even know what to say." "Thank you, Mr. Raymond. You have no idea what this means." Mr. Raymond nodded, his smile kind. "He's got talent, Mrs. Silva, and more than that, he's got heart. I think he could go far with the right chance." William's mother wiped her eyes, taking a deep breath. She looked at her son, her expression softening. "William, you should go for it. This is a gift. You have to take it." William felt his chest tighten, a mix of excitement and fear. He wanted this more than anything, but the doubts came rushing back. What if he wasn't good enough? What if he failed and disappointed everyone? Mr. Raymond seemed to sense his hesitation. He leaned forward, his voice gentle. "William, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing it anyway. Even when you're scared. I see a lot of courage in you." William swallowed hard. Nodding slowly, he looked at the ER again, then at his mother, who was smiling at him, her eyes still wet. She looked proud, and that made the fear seem a little smaller. "All right," William said, his voice shaking a little. "I'll do it." Mr. Raymond's face lit up, and he reached out, patting William on the shoulder. "That's the spirit, boy. I know you'll make the most of it." They spent the next few minutes talking about the academy, where it was, when William would start, and how everything would work. William's mother asked questions, her voice full of emotion, and William could feel the excitement slowly building in his chest, pushing the fear further away. As Mr. Raymond finished his coffee and stood to leave, he looked at William, his expression serious. Remember, William, this is just the beginning. You have to work hard every single day, but I know you can do it. I wouldn't be giving you this if I didn't believe in you. William nodded, a small smile spreading across his face. I won't let you down, Mr. Raymond, I promise. Mr. Raymond nodded, then turned to William's mother. Thank you for the coffee, Mrs. Silva, and thank you for raising such a brave young man. She smiled, her eyes glistening with tears again. Thank you, Mr. Raymond. You're giving him a chance we could never have given him. We're so grateful. As Mr. Raymond left, William stood in the doorway watching him walk away. He clutched the voucher in his hands, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement, fear, and hope. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he had a real chance. He looked at his mother, who was smiling at him, her eyes filled with pride. She nodded, her voice soft. This is your chance, William. Go and make it count. William nodded, at determination starting to bloom inside him. I will, Mom, I promise. William woke up before dawn. He had hardly slept all night, his mind buzzing with excitement and nerves. Today was the day, his first day at the soccer academy. The thought filled him with both hope and dread. He had looked at the voucher countless times since Mr. Raymond had handed it to him, wondering if he was really ready. His mother had been supportive, her encouraging words echoing in his head. As he dressed, he slipped into his old faded shorts and t-shirt. He didn't have fancy gear or any soccer cleats like the other kids probably did. All he had were his bare feet, toughened by years of playing on hard ground, but that would have to be enough. He grabbed a piece of bread from the kitchen and quietly left the house, not wanting to wake his mom, who had stayed up late talking to him about what today would mean. The academy wasn't far, but it felt like the longest walk of his life. Every step seemed to carry the weight of his fears, his doubts. What if he wasn't good enough? What if the other boys were way ahead of him? He shook his head, trying to push the thoughts away. He had to focus. He had promised his mom, and he had promised Mr. Raymond, he couldn't let them down. When he reached the academy, he stopped, staring at the entrance. It was bigger than he had imagined, a high gate with the academy's name across the top. There were a few other boys standing around, all of them wearing uniforms, bright colors that made William feel small in his old clothes. He swallowed hard, his stomach churning, but he couldn't turn back now. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The boys barely glanced at him, busy chatting among themselves, but William felt their eyes on him, judging. He could almost hear what they might be thinking. Who was this kid? Why was he here without proper gear? William kept his head down, heading toward the field, hoping no one would notice him for too long. A man with a whistle around his neck stood near the edge of the field.